What's up, everybody? Excuse me. What's up, everybody? Welcome to System Crafters. I'm David Wilson, and today we're back with another Friday live stream, as we always do on Fridays. We got a lot of people here this morning, so just want to say hello to a few people here. So, what's up, TRDV, Amir, Luis, Eric, David. Let's see who else. Yele, F Society, Juanito, Garjola, Piotr, Drishal, Glenn, Mark, Emmanuel, Martin, Valentino, Hendrik, Ashraz, Slalom Skater, Rune. Nice to see you all here today. Today I'm having problems speaking apparently because I just got the COVID vaccine yesterday, or at least the first dose of the COVID vaccine. So my head is a little bit, I don't know, a little bit fuzzy. So we'll see how that goes. But at least we're gonna talk about some software licenses today. So that's really a good topic to talk about whenever your brain is not functioning correctly. But we'll see if we can do the best we can here. So let's see, what else is interesting before we get started? I'm trying to think if there's anything cool that I did with Emacs this week. Not too much this week. I've been focused on work stuff primarily, but I'm hoping that next week I'll have a little bit more time to do some side hacking on some Emacs Lisp stuff. And of course, I think we're gonna have another episode of the Emacs Lisp series next week, so I gotta start getting prepared for that. But I think that we'll have a fun one there. I believe this time we're going to talk about writing your own minor mode. So that episode should be out probably, I'm going to say Tuesday or Wednesday just to be safe, because I don't know how long it's going to take me to get it done. But that'll be fun. I'm looking forward to having that part done on the .crafter.el project so that we can actually start using it day to day as a .files management tool. I think that's basically the last thing that's really needed so that you can automatically get your .files to tangle every time that you run it. Garjola says, did OBS also get a COVID shot? There's some lag in the video. Maybe my computer is it just needs to be rebooted or something. Hopefully it won't be laggy the whole time. Anybody else seeing lag in the video? I don't know. Streaming using a laptop, even if it's a powerful laptop, is not really a good idea, but I do it anyway. Valentino asked, do you have a playlist of your music playing in the background right now? I don't have a playlist, but if you look at the video that I posted on Wednesday, the installing the Geeks Package Manager video, that's the first time that I actually put the links to all of the songs that I have in the background into the description of the video. So if you scroll down to the very bottom of the description, you'll see all those songs. However, I'm going to start putting those in all of the video descriptions just because I should do that because it's Creative Commons. But you can go check that out there until I get it actually copied over to the rest. Okay, it's laggy, but that's okay. I mean, what can we do? It's just the nature of the beast. I've got OBS running at the same time as everything else, so it's very, very, very slow. All right, so let's just go ahead and get started into the topic for today. So what I want to talk about today is the various open source and free software licenses. And I'm not going to talk about everything because there's so many licenses, there's just really no way to talk about everything. However, what I would be interested to talk about are the ones that I've looked at over the years, things that I think are interesting, and ones that I would recommend that you use if you want to release any code or any software out into the world. So first things first, I'm not a lawyer. I did not study law. I do not profess any kind of full legal understanding of any of these licenses other than just what I've interpreted myself. So everything that you hear today is going to be my personal opinion and my personal interpretation of what I've read. Others out there may have other opinions or other understanding, or maybe you actually have a legal background and you know things more than I do. If you do know things, please feel free to speak up, but I also wouldn't trust that anyone in the chat is a lawyer. So everything should be taken with a grain of salt. And if you really are concerned about the legal aspects of any software license, I definitely recommend consulting a lawyer. However, a lot of this stuff has existed for so long, and there's been so much discussion about it and so much actual legal action that has taken place where there's sort of precedent that I think many of the older licenses can be pretty safe to just use as you understand. Let's see. Nice to see you here, Fernando. So a few of the resources that I find helpful for looking into open source and free software licenses, the first one primarily is the GNU licenses list. This is quite a long list that talks about pretty much every license that's ever been used for software. And it writes everything from the perspective of GNU using the GPL and focusing on copyleft. So everything is going to come from that perspective. But it does have good perspective on these various licenses and what they're good for, and maybe which ones you probably shouldn't use because maybe they don't cover things well enough, or they don't protect the user's freedoms, etc. There's a long list of things that are GPL compatible licenses. So if you want to use, if you want to release software as GPL, or if you are contributing to a project or using code from a project that's GPL, you would definitely want to see which ones are compatible with the GPL. Everything else below is going to be non-compatible, and they'll probably tell you why it's non-compatible. So this is a really good resource for learning more about software licenses. There's also hey, thanks Fernando, appreciate the $5 and €5 super chat. There's also the OSI approved licenses list, or I guess not really approved, but the licenses list that can have some other perspective, but it's more from a generalized open source perspective and not so much a free software perspective. And then GitHub has produced this site called Choose a License, which is more of like a wizard where you tell it what you want to do, basically, and it will give you suggestions on what licenses you can use. And I think that's a pretty useful site for learning more about licenses, or if you just have a question about like what license you should use in any given circumstance, it's a good place to go. But today, I'm just going to talk about licenses that are compatible with the GPL, mainly because a lot of the software that we use on this channel that we're all talking about are GPL licensed software, so it makes sense to keep things in the context of things that are compatible with GPL. All right, so I said that I'm going to be ranking the open source licenses, so let me tell you how I'm going to rank them or score them, I suppose. There's 4 different dimensions that I'm looking at here. One is like, what are the user's rights, and does a license, focus on the user's rights, or does it give them many rights, or does it restrict their rights, etc. Also, how can the source be used by other developers? So part of the reason for sharing your source into the world is so that someone else can take the source and do something with it, or maybe modify it, or maybe redistribute it with their modifications. So how good is that basically for the developer? Also, is the creator protected? Can they be held liable for things that happen as a result of using the software? Or can their trademarks or names be protected from people using them to advertise their own modifications to the software? And lastly, can an average person understand the license when they read it? That's kind of important because if you have a long legal document, a user probably isn't going to read it, or at least understand what it's saying. So it's kind of useful if the license can be understood to some degree. So I'm going to be scoring each license from 1 to 5, 5 being the best score, 1 being the worst, on each of these criteria. So first of all, let's talk about the permissive licenses. So they're basically just that. They allow you to do a lot of things with the software and the code as long as you don't hold the author liable for damages. So basically, in general, with permissive licenses, you can change the code, you can distribute your changes to the code, you can share the binaries for free, typically. Yeah, but basically they usually have warranty statements in there saying that you can't say that the author is liable for anything, like if your computer blows up or if there's a calculation error in some financial software that causes you to lose money or not pay your taxes correctly. You can't hold the author of the source liable for that, which is kind of good for people who are trying to just, put software into the world, because, if you had to worry about every single line of code that you wrote, you probably wouldn't share any code into the world. So it's kind of good from that perspective. However, there are people who would say that it's not a great thing to have these licenses that remove all liability for the author, because then it makes people who write code lazy and not really care too much about having bugs that would cause damages to people. So I don't really know what your perspective is on that, but at least for me, I think it would be better if I felt protected that, at least somebody wouldn't sue me if, like, maybe my program deleted a file of theirs that they thought was very important, Let's see. Garjola says, can a person understand? We agree that lawyers are not persons, right? Lawyers are people, but they definitely have a different operating system in their brain for how to understand societal interactions, I guess you could say. All right, so one little difference between a few of these licenses is that some of them are actually a little bit more specific on how you can use the names of the creators, or maybe the product name or the trademark names, etc., which is kind of interesting. All right, so the MIT license. Now, the MIT license, if you read the documentation on the GNU licenses list, they prefer to call this the X11 license, because they say that the MIT has had a variety of different licenses over the years, so it's not really the MIT license, because there are a few MIT licenses, but everybody understands this as the MIT license these days. So this is a very straightforward license, very simple to read and understand. It's very short, so definitely it scores higher on the understandability score. It allows the user to do anything with the code and the software binaries, and it protects the developer mostly from being held liable for damages. Brian says that I think there are circumstances like gross negligence where you're still held responsible. I guess that's possible, yeah. So don't take me to say that you're protected from any possible negative outcome for you if your code does something bad, but I think that basically you're just trying to disclaim any liability up front. MIT seems to be one of the most common licenses used these days, especially by corporations who want to be able to release their code into the open and make it easy for people to use it. But the thing that's interesting here is that there isn't an explicit patent license or patent clause in this license, and that's sort of a thing that comes up occasionally, where basically they don't say anything in some licenses about how software patents may affect your usage of the license. So maybe they say that you can use the software for any purpose, but then if they decide they want to sue you for patent infringement, then they could possibly do that. Now, in the MIT license, some people have interpreted this to mean in the license that actually does give you an implicit patent grant, because it says how you can sell and use the software. And they say that this lines up with some language in the U.S. Government code about patents, but I'm not a lawyer. I don't really know. I just know that MIT may be more okay on the front of patent licensing than other licenses would be. And it's also interesting to note that this license and BSD license were created before software patents were recognized by U.S. law. So that really explains why they don't mention software patents directly, because it's not something that was a problem whenever this license was originally created. So to prove that this is a short license and relatively easy to read, here's the text of the license itself. Basically, the first paragraph is just telling you what permission you have to use the source and the binary. So permission is granted free of charge to any person obtaining a copy of the software and associated documentation files to deal in the software without restriction, including using, copying, modify, merge, publish, distribute, sublicense, and or sell copies of the software, and to permit persons to whom the software is furnished to do so. So this license transfers to the people who you pass the software on to as well, subject to the following conditions. And it says that basically you need to include this copyright notice and the permission notice with all copies or substantial portions of the software. So one thing you may have seen before in various open source projects is like a third-party licenses file, where it will include the license text for the variety of things that are included with that software, like libraries or maybe code that is included with it. So that's because MIT license and others require that you include the license of the original code with your software whenever you distribute it. So a lot of times if you go look at the about screen, or maybe like if on a mobile app, if you go look into the settings at the very bottom, you'll see like a licenses thing where it will tell you all the licenses for the libraries used for the software. So that's why, because these licenses tell you that you need to at least say that you're using the software. So the conditions are that the software is provided as is without warranty of any kind. Authors or copyright holders, in no event shall authors or copyright holders be liable for any claim, damages, or other liability, blah, blah, blah. Basically that it's up to you to use this software, and if something bad happens, then don't come complaining to us because we have no warranty. This also means, which isn't really spelled out explicitly, we are not responsible for fixing any issues that you find with the software. So the people who go around demanding people fixing their bugs on GitHub repositories or whatever, they need to go read the license, because they have no right to demand that the author fix a bug, because the author has basically said in this license that they basically give you the software as is. If there's bugs, then it's your problem. So it also can be a tool against those kinds of trolls who will come to your project and try to bully you. But I don't know. I mean, hopefully people are a little bit more civilized than that. I know that that's not actually the case in the real world a lot of times, but you know, that's the way it is these days. All right, so ranking the MIT license. So some of these rankings, I've been sort of like changing them as I was writing the content for this, so I might adjust them even more as I go here and as part of the conversation that we have about it. But here's what I'm thinking so far for the MIT license. So for the user, I'm ranking this a 4 out of 5. Mainly because it gives the user basically the ability to do anything they want with the code or the software. Since it doesn't give an explicit patent mention, or you know, like it doesn't say anything about how patents can be used, or how if licensing the creator's patents to you, basically, so that you don't get sued for patents. I'm giving it a 4 instead of 5 just because it doesn't have that. Otherwise, it's great because you can basically do whatever you want with it. For other developers who might want to use the software, I'm giving it a 5 because basically you have the ability to do whatever you want with it, so long as you just comply with including the license file, which is not very hard to do. I mean, I guess you could say it's a 4.5 because it still requires you to do a small task to distribute this license along with your code or your binaries, but it's still pretty easy to use the MIT license. For the creator, I'm thinking in terms of how the creator is being protected. I mean, since there's some protection here with the warranty statement, you know, it at least warrants a 3. But I'm also thinking in terms of the creator of the software putting their stuff out in the world, and then someone taking it and making a competing product with it and not giving back to the community or to the original project that was created. So from that perspective, since anybody can go do anything they want with this, it's a 3. It's also a 3 because there's nothing in here stating that you cannot use the name of the creator to market what you make based on the software. So basically they can say, oh yes, we contain components written by David Wilson. You know, if you want your name to not be brought up, then maybe you shouldn't use the MIT license. I'm giving it a 4 for easiness to understand because it's pretty short. There is a little bit of legalese in here, but it's not too impenetrable, you know, for the average person. So I think that only this like warranty statement, it gets a little bit more legalistic. But the first paragraph is pretty clear about what you're able to do. So I think that understandability is good in that case. All right, so the next permissive license would be the BSD license. Now this one has a few different variations. In fact, there's actually 4. The first one had, I think, 4 clauses, and by clauses I mean there's these bullet points, basically 1, 2, 3, and then there was a 4th one in the original. And then over the years, they've been removing clauses basically to make the remaining licenses. So the ones that are most common are the 3-clause and 2-clause variants, and there's a main reason why there's the 3-clause and the 2-clause. It's less specific than the MIT license, though, about what the user can do with the code or what the developer can do with the code. I mean, it does say that you have freedom to do things, but it doesn't spell it out in exactly the same way, which I think is important in terms of any kind of legal action, because the more specific a license is, the better off everybody is, I think. So the license itself is very simple. Redistribution and use in source and binary forms with or without modification are permitted provided that the following conditions are met. Number 1, redistributions of source code must retain the above copyright notice and list of conditions and the following disclaimer. So similar to the MIT license, you have to include the license of this code along with anything that you distribute the code or the binaries of the code with. Redistributions in binary form must reproduce the above copyright notice and list of conditions in the following disclaimer in the documentation and or materials provided with the distribution. So basically, in both source and binary form, you have to reproduce the same copyright notice. Now, the third clause is the one that makes a difference between the 3-clause and 2-clause versions of the BSD license. And it's actually one that I find to be kind of important, which is neither the name of the copyright holder, the entity that created this software, nor the names of its contributors may be used to endorse or promote products derived from this software without prior written permission. So this is protection for the people who created this software to not have their names used to market any software that is derived from it. And I think it's kind of important because if someone goes and makes something that is kind of, user hostile or maybe immoral for some reason, you don't necessarily want your name attached to that, even though you are basically giving your code or binaries away for people to use them for any purpose. So this is a consideration that you need to make if you want to use a BSD license. This could be a reason why you would use BSD 3-clause over MIT, because it just gives you this extra little bit of protection from your name being used. Now, obviously, someone could just go do it anyway, and it would be up to you to sue them. And if you don't have the financial means to sue somebody, then you might not be able to. So these are all protection up to the ability that you have to sue someone if they violate them. So just putting that out there. Let's see. Yele asked, is there a particular reason why all this legalese is always written like this? I have no idea, but I would also love to know the answer to that. All right, so the warranty section. This software is provided by the copyright holders and contributors as is, and any express or implied warranties, blah, 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 blah. Merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose are disclaimed. Hey, Demis. In no event shall the copyright holder be liable for any damages. And they're very specific about what types of damages, which is different than the MIT license. So this is a little bit better from that perspective. However, caused on any theory of liability, whether in contract, strict liability, or tort, arising in any way out of the use of the software, even if advised of the possibility of such damage. So even if you tell them, hey, this could break your computer, and they use it anyway, then you're not responsible. I think that's what that means. All right, so I've given 2 different rankings here, one for the 2-clause, one for the 3-clause. Let's see if I still agree with the numbers that I've given here. So for 2-clause, for the user, for both of them basically, I've given a 3. So the reason why I gave a 3 is because it's not as clear about the use cases. It's more concerned with how the license should be redistributed with the code. The warranty section is the more important thing because it's basically talking about the things that you can't sue the creators for. So it's a little bit different than the MIT because the MIT license is more specific about how it can be used. So that's something that may matter, but maybe it doesn't matter that much. I don't really know if it matters in legal terms. Someone who actually is a lawyer would have to tell us that. For the developer, I would say it's a 5. Yeah, I said 5 for MIT also, because basically you just have to reproduce a copyright notice. It's not a major pain, so it's something that you could do pretty easily, but it is something that you have to remember to do, and theoretically, someone could sue you for not doing it because you're breaking the terms of the license if you don't include the copyright notice with what you distribute. But since it's such an easy problem to fix, and there's no real monetary damages to the original creator of the code, I mean, there's really no legal case other than just saying you broke the license and now we say you can't use it anymore. You can't use the code anymore. So I don't really know what the actual threat there is. For the creator on the 2-clause, I'm giving it a 3 because it doesn't protect the creator's name from being used for marketing purposes. Whereas for the 3-clause, I'm giving a 4 because it does protect the user, the creator's name or the contributor's names from being used. However, it doesn't protect the trademarks of the thing that you created. So let's say you want to create a piece of software that you want to monetize and you want to have a brand for it. Basically, you want to make a trademark, you want to have a business built around it. This license doesn't prevent someone from using your trademark name if they release derivations of your program. However, I think US trademark law would allow you to still sue them for using your trademark anyway. So the license itself is not really the place that you would need to protect that. As far as understanding is concerned, I gave this a 5 also in both cases because the language is very simple, at least for the first sections. And I would also say that this is, even though there's a lot of legalese here in this section, it's more specific than the MIT license, so it's better from that perspective. And a couple people are saying that the FSF could sue someone on your side in case of violation, and Garjola says that Software Conservancy does Software Freedom Conservancy, I think, does enforcement for its members. So maybe there are some organizations that can help you if you do have trouble with this, but I would say you're probably on your own in most cases. Let's see. All right, so Apache. Apache is definitely a more robust license that is also permissive, in that it gives you a lot of the same freedoms that are given in the MIT and BSD licenses. However, it has more protections for the creator of the software. So the downside is that the license itself is a lot harder to read because it is more legalistic. It's written like a contract instead of just a sort of disclaimer license. And also it does give the developer, let me change this. It gives the developer more work because they have to put a prominent notice in all source files that have been changed from the original. So if you change any code and you release the source code, you have to have a prominent notice saying, we've changed this since the original version. And I'm guessing the point there is that you don't want the creator of the software that they've licensed as Apache doesn't want someone who's taken a derived version of that code that has been changed by someone else and then trying to come and complain to the original author about changes that someone else made, because it's not their problem. So it's probably the reason why they're saying that. One other benefit for the creator is that it makes things more clear that any contribution to the source of the project will fall under the terms of this license, which is not the case for other permissive licenses. Those other licenses were created before we had this idea of mass open source where anybody can come along and contribute to a project. The Apache license was definitely created around the time where open source was a thing, where people were contributing to open source projects like the Apache web server, etc. So now there's some provisions in place to say that when you contribute to this project, you're basically saying that your contributions are automatically going to go under the same provisions of the Apache license for that project. So that's kind of a good thing to have, I think. It's also good for the developer or the creator. Let's say I've changed some of my terminology as I was working on this. Because it doesn't give the user any license to use trademarks or product names for modified versions of the software. So if you have a trademark, then you can still enforce trademark using the US legal system. However, if you call your program some name and you haven't trademarked it, then they can still redistribute a modified version of your program with the same name, unless you say in the license that they can't do that. Now, obviously, once again, you have to enforce that if someone does it. You can't just, expect someone to follow the rules, because there are a lot of people online who don't really care about rules. But at least it's said in this license that you can't use the same name if you make a derivation. You can use the same name so long as you distribute the software or the source unmodified, but if you modify it, you have to use a different name. It also protects the user from patent action unless the user sues the copyright holder. So this is the first time where we start seeing something about patents, software patents in a license. So in this case, every user of this of the software is granted a patent license from the creator of the software, so that they have basically universal rights to use that patent. So if anybody has patented, the copyright holder has patented anything related to that software, anybody can use the software with no problems about patents, unless you happen to sue the person who created that software, and then your right to use the patents is now revoked, which sort of makes sense because there is a long history of patent trolling in the software industry after patents became a thing, where someone will sue an open source project to say that they're infringing on patents whenever that's not really the case. They're just trying to get a settlement. And then basically you need to have a way to say, well, then you can't use my patents anymore, so they can do legal action against each other. So they have to be able to defend themselves in court. So I think that's the reason why this is the case. So it does give some more protection to the copyright holder who may have patents on some of the sections of the code they've written. So basically, since this is a permissive license that does have more protections for users and for the creators of software, and even for developers. The FSF recommends this license for larger projects that do not want to be copyleft. So if you don't want to go to full GPL, they recommend using Apache 2.0 for your source code. So this license is a lot longer, so I'm not going to include it directly in the org mode file here, but I will open it really quickly so we can take a look at it. And once again, we're popping up in the wrong place here. Another thing I need to fix. All right, so let's see. I'm going to try to zoom this in a little bit. All right. So this is definitely a legally written license because they've got all these definition sections. Basically, they're going to define the terms they will use before they use them later in the document, which is a good thing because if you don't know these terms, if you're not a lawyer, then it might be useful for you to read these. However, it does make it harder to read in general to have the definitions here, talking about derivative works, contributions, contributors, the grant of the copyright licenses. Each contributor hereby grants you a perpetual, worldwide, non-exclusive, no-charge, royalty-free, irrevocable copyright license to reproduce, prepare derivative works, publicly display, perform, sub-license, distribute the work. I mean, basically, they're giving you all the legal language to say that you can do basically whatever you want to with the code. You can make derivatives, etc. They're also giving you an explicit patent grant or patent license that says that if there are any license or any patents on this software, then you have the right to use them. But they do mention if you institute patent litigation against any entity alleging that the work or a contribution incorporated within the work constitutes direct or contributory patent infringement, then any patent licenses granted to you shall terminate as of the date such litigation is filed. So basically, if you sue us, then you don't have a license or patents anymore. They're very specific about redistribution, and they do say that you must retain in source form all copyright, patent, trademark, and attribution notices from the source form of the work. Let's see, did they mention the binaries? And you must cause any modified files to carry prominent notices stating that you changed the file. So that's a little bit more work for the developer to do if they actually change the source code of the original project. Let's see. There's also something about notice files. I guess if you have a notice file, then they want you to transfer that along as well. You may add your own copyright statement to your modifications and provide additional or different license terms or conditions for use, reproduction, etc. So basically, you can relicense this work whenever you make your own modifications to it. Your use, let's see, provided that your use, reproduction, and distribution otherwise complies with the conditions stated in this license. So long as you comply with the license, you can relicense it to another type of license, basically. Trademarks. This license does not grant permission to use the trademarks, trade names, service marks, or product names of the licensor except as required for reasonable and customary use in describing the origin of the work. So basically, you can say where you got it, but you can't say that it's being endorsed by those people. And the contributions aspect, unless you explicitly state otherwise, any contribution intentionally submitted, if you intentionally submit a contribution to the project, shall be under the terms and conditions of this license without any additional terms or conditions. Nothing herein shall supersede or modify the terms of any separate license agreement you may have executed. So basically, yeah, any contribution you make is going to be under the Apache license as well. Liability and warranty disclaimers. So yeah, that's basically it. It's a lot more specific about everything, but if you want to be protected better, I would say this is a good license, especially if you're going to have a larger project where you want it to be open source, but you also want to build a fairly sized business around it. You want to be protected legally in better terms, I would suppose. So let's see, questions. Apache licensed stuff cannot be used for Spacefair. Did it say that? Oh, okay. So I think because you said because it says worldwide, yeah, saying worldwide is kind of strange. I think there's new licenses that are coming. Like, what did I hear? Someone had a contract somewhere that says basically this contract is in effect for this universe and all undiscovered universes. Basically, like some lawyers they understand that they need to be very specific. Let's see what else. Juanito asks, how can you change the license of your code? For example, from MIT to GPL, is it enough to change the license file, or should there be a whole legal process? Well, the only thing that matters in the end is what, in my opinion, I'm not a lawyer, but the only thing that matters is that if nobody else has contributed to your project, then I think that you as a copyright holder can change the license at any time. So any future release of your code or binaries will be under the new license at that moment where you change it. But if you have received contributions from other people, depending on the license you're using, you may not have the right to change the license because they have contributed their own basically copyrighted work into your project, and they also have a say on whether the license changes or not. So you may have seen at some point in the past, various open source projects have an issue in their repository where they're basically asking all previous contributors to sign off on changing to a different license. The MIT and BSD licenses say nothing about what the contributors' contributions mean in terms of copyright on the project or in terms of licensing. Apache is the first place I've seen where they actually do mention it. I think they mention it also in the MPL and maybe the GPL. Typically, projects that allow outside contributions that are using MIT, etc., will use something called a CLA, like a contributor license agreement, where you have to sign this agreement before you contribute to basically say, I'm giving my code, I'm relinquishing my copyright to the project so that they have the ability to make these decisions for me in the future. So it is a bit more work if you do want people to contribute your project and you want to have freedom to be able to change the license in the future. So just keep that in mind. If you create an open source project and you're going to use MIT or BSD, you might consider doing some kind of copyright assignment or at least a CLA agreement. It is more headache, but at the same time, it will give you freedom to change things in the future if you want to. So, I mean, it is a good reason to try to be clear with yourself about what license you want to use in the beginning before you get too far into it so that you don't have to do this later, but it is something to keep in mind. And what Ashra says in the chat, I believe is true also. Previous shipment of your software stays under the old license. So the time at which you released the code or the binary under a particular license, it doesn't retroactively change back if you change the license. It's only from now going forward. All right, so what else do I want to say about that? I think that's it. So for the user, I would say this is a 4 because it is very clear about what you can use it for. And it lets you use it for pretty much everything. So, I mean, maybe it could even be considered a 5 because it protects everyone involved from patent issues or anything else. So maybe I'll just upgrade that to a 5 because it's good from that perspective, just from the user's rights perspective. Well, no, let's say 4 because GPL I would say maybe a 5 on user. But so developer. There is more work involved for the developer who wants to use this because you have to do a little bit more work in terms of like any files that you change, you need to place a notice. I might actually, did I put those as 5 above? I think I did, yeah. So I'll leave this as 4 because there's a little bit more work involved. However, the developer has the ability to do a lot of things and they can even relicense their modifications to the code, which is pretty good because then you have some flexibility about how you proceed in the future. The creator, it does pretty good protection for the creator, is much more explicit about warranties, etc. It also has a patent clause, which protects the creator from patent trolling, which is a good thing. So I'm saying that it's a 4. Why do I not say it's a 5? I don't know. Maybe I would say it's a 5 because maybe so far, well, okay. I don't say it's a 5 because of one other reason we'll talk about it a little bit later. Understanding, I'm saying it's a 2. Yeah, I would say it's a 2 just because it's so legalistic in terms of the language being used that the average person would have to spend, 30 minutes trying to digest what they're reading. It's not a thing where you can read it in 5 minutes and understand what your rights are. You kind of have to go through it with a fine-tooth comb and keep referring to other sections and the definitions and whatnot to be able to understand what the rights are. And there's a lot of specific legal terms being used, so it's not very easy for the average person to read. However, I think that that's sort of the point because if you want more protection, you have to be very specific. And one thing that maybe you don't know about law, which I'm not a lawyer, so I don't really know specifically, but my assumption from reading legal documents, reading end-user license agreements, reading open source licenses, is that specific terms have very specific meaning in the legal system. And the reason why you see very weird words or weird phrases is because they have very specific meaning, and it's almost like writing code. They call it the legal code for a reason, because it's supposed to be rules that can be followed. So when you have a more complex document like the Apache license, it's because they're trying to be very clear about what everyone's rights are and what will happen if any of these rules are broken, basically. So yeah, if you're a business that wants to open source a product that you make without doing it as copyleft, like with GPL, then this is a really good choice. The only downside is that it's harder for the user to comply with the license because there are more rules they have to follow. And as you can see, I did not finish writing all of this before I started the stream. All right, so we talked about the WTFPL a little bit, maybe 2 weeks ago, whenever we looked at Angry Bacon's dot files. And this is a very simple license. It's fully permissive, but it's totally unclear on terms. I would not trust this as a legal document. I don't think anybody is actually protected by it. I think it's more of a joke than anything. So I personally do not recommend using this license. I mean, it's fine if you're just sharing your dot files on the internet, but don't use it for a real program. So basically, there's only one stipulation, that is do what the F you want to do. And it mentions that in terms of copying, distribution, and modification. So there's no stipulations about what your actual rights are. It's very vague about what your rights are. It's very vague about what the creator's rights are. Or actually, there's nothing mentioned about the creator's rights or anybody who wants to use this in their own source. It's sort of just a joke. I think that the person who wrote this probably is just like, software licenses are ridiculous. Let me just make a joke license that people will use because they think it's funny. Yeah, sure. If you want to use it because it's funny, it's fine. Just don't use it on a real program that you're trying to, put out into the world for an actual purpose. All right, so we're going to talk about copyleft licenses now, and specifically the GPL, the GNU Public License, or General Public License. Is that what it is? GNU General Public License, and the MPL, the Mozilla Public License. So, and I apologize for saying "so" all the time. That's just sort of my way to focus my mind. I know I'd say it all the time in videos. It's a little bit annoying to me. Copyleft licenses use the power of copyright to enforce that any modifications to the freely shared source are also made available under the same license as the original. So copyright is basically the creator's right to benefit from the work that they've created. Copyleft is basically saying, I want to make everyone benefit from the work that I'm creating, and I also don't want, I want to make sure that any improvements to my work to also benefit everyone who can possibly use it. It is meant to ensure that the whole community can benefit from improvements made by anyone. So with the MIT license, if someone takes your code and makes improvements to it, they don't have to release it again. They can just keep it to themselves. They can put it into a proprietary product, so long as they include your copyright notice and the MIT license that came along with it. They don't have to share their improvements. For the GPL, on the other hand, you do have to share your improvements because that is part of the license. So the thing that matters here, if you're a person that's creating software, is that someone can basically create a product out of your hard work without you or the people who you care about to receive any benefit from it. So I think that's a good reason for a small team or an individual developer to use the GPL for any applications that they write, because it will give them some protection from someone being able to make a competing product and then just stopping them, basically. So I think that's kind of an important thing. Eric reminds me to look at the Don't Be a Jerk license. Let me take a look at that after I finish these. All right, so the GPL is the first software copyleft license to ever exist. It was created by Richard Stallman in the 80s, basically because he wanted the software he was creating for the GNU project to be free and shareable to anybody. We talked about the GNU project maybe 2 or 3 streams ago, and that's basically it. He wanted to make sure that the software could be shared and anybody can make modifications to it and share those modifications to other people, basically to follow the 4 freedoms of the GNU project. This is a viral license. If you take any GPL license code and put it into your source, your code will have to be licensed as GPL. So in the license, it will say that that the terms of the original code will now apply to your code as soon as you take it. And also any derivations you make from that original project will also, also be licensed as GPL. You cannot relicense any code that's written as GPL. There are 3 major versions of the GPL. There was the original GPL license that was created, I think, in 1989. There's also the GPL 2.0, which is used in quite a lot of projects, and also the Linux kernel. And then there's the GPL 3.0, which was, I don't remember, I think maybe 10, 15 years ago, the 3.0 was made. And I think that was made around the time that there was a whole big issue with like TiVo using the Linux kernel and other free software in the box and not allowing the user to change that software. So I think a lot of what GPL 3 does is protect the user's rights to be able to change any software on the hardware that they bought if it is created from from free software. Heike says, please talk more about the rights of any user to use a program for whatever purpose. This is also important. Yeah, basically, the GPL is very much about the user being able to use the software for any purpose, no matter what the circumstances. I mean, there's sort of a thing in the world these days where people are trying to restrict who can use their software that they create based on what type of organization they are or what sort of political faction they belong to. The GPL does not sort of engage in that really. It's more about just user freedom and being able to use software for whatever purpose. Garjola says GPL, the viral aspect only applies if you distribute the code, not if it stays in-house. Yes, that's true. So basically, if you're distributing the code or the binaries, if you've made any changes to the code, you have to make the code open. If you make personal modifications to GPL code that you do not share with other people, you don't have to share the source, basically. And that's also the reason why the AGPL was created. So there was a company called Afero, I think that's what it's called, who created a variation of the GPL called the AGPL, which was intended to close the cloud loophole where GPL software that's being used on servers is technically not being distributed because you're not giving someone a copy of your software to run. They're coming to you and using the software as a service. So this was a common loophole for GPL software back in like the 90s and early 2000s, where if you wanted to create a service for people to use, then you didn't have to share your source because technically you aren't distributing the program. So the AGPL was created so that someone who's creating service software can make anyone who uses that same service software to make their own service, they will also have to follow the rules of the GPL. So it's good if you want to make something like, let's say, Nextcloud, and you want to make sure that anybody who makes modifications to your software that they're going to host on their own server will also have to share their modifications to the world if they are hosting it somewhere, basically, for the, I guess, general use of anyone, not just for your personal use. There's also the LGPL, which is the lesser GPL. This license was created because a lot of people were afraid to use the GPL because they didn't want their whole program source to be made open. They just wanted to be able to use some GPL software without having to make their own program be GPL. So the LGPL was mainly created for libraries. So if you have a library that you create that you want someone to use, they can integrate their library into your library into their program and not have their code need to be licensed by the GPL, but only if the linking to your library is dynamic and not static. So what that means is, so long as the person is not including your binary, your library binary or source into their program, then they don't have to make their code GPL. So on GNU Linux systems, what you typically see is that programs will be installed alongside dependencies. You don't have a program that has all of its dependencies installed together. Usually you have to have, when you install a program, it has requirements for certain libraries and you have to install them somehow, either through your package manager or through manual use or whatever. And that's how these programs can not be licensed as GPL, even though they use LGPL licensed libraries, because there's a dynamic linking between those two programs. You're not shipping that dependency as a part of the whole program that you're shipping, basically. So I think that was mainly to keep people from trying to go all the way to using the more permissive licenses like MIT, BSD, etc. Ashraz says, static linking is fine, but you have to make it possible to relink your binary with other variants of the static library. That's a good point. So basically, the usage of the library has to respect user freedom in that if you're using a free software component and it's statically linked, you have to make it so that the user can replace that component if they want to make their own modifications to it and then put it back into your program. So thanks, Ashraz, for bringing that up. Koenig says, is LGPL applied to servers like AGPL? No, AGPL is the only variant of GPL that has that specific service clause in it, I believe. So here's an interesting aspect of the GPL. So the FSF will encourage you to use GPL 3.0 plus so that you automatically get upgraded to the latest version of the license, no matter what version of the license you originally released it as. So basically, many GPL projects will use the GPL 2 plus or 3 plus licenses, basically GPL 2.0 or any future versions. But I kind of wonder, is that a good thing? I mean, if you trust the people who are creating updates to the GPL license, then I think it's fine, because you want to make sure that your code is going to be enjoying whatever the freedoms are of the later versions or the newer versions of the GPL. However, I don't really know if we can trust the FSF at this point, because things are in such disarray that I wouldn't necessarily trust a new version of the GPL to necessarily fall within the same framework, I guess you could say. Now, I could be a little bit paranoid on that, but for me, I would probably not do a 3.0 plus. I would just do like a 3.0 or a 2.0, etc. Whenever the GPL 3.0 came out, I think Richard Stallman was trying to encourage Linus Torvalds to change Linux to use GPL 3, and Linus did not want to do it. So they're still using GPL 2 for that reason. So that's another thing that you have to keep in mind with at least the GPL, is that I think by default in the license, it does say the GPL 3.0 or any future version. So just be careful. If you don't want that to be the case, you need to use a version that doesn't automatically upgrade you to the newest version. Ayatku says, I think it's risky regardless to leave something open-ended regardless of who it is. You don't want to agree with something prematurely. I agree with that. All right, so let's see. One last thing to mention is that one thing that people commonly misunderstand about the GPL is that because it's free software, it doesn't mean that it's free in price necessarily. Free software can be sold, and it often is, but there's always that question of, well, if someone can buy your software and then immediately give a copy of it to somebody else, which is allowed by the GPL, are you going to have any trouble from that? And I say it really just depends on how you structure your project. And I'll give an example of that a little bit later about some ways I've thought about this in the past. So let's look at the GPL 3.0 really quickly just to get an idea of what that looks like. Let's see. In fact, I think I could just probably pull one up on my own computer because I have one here in my .files folder. License, yeah. All right, so the GPL 3.0, I'll try to increase the text size of this a little bit. Okay, so this is fairly long, not easy to read, very specific. Yeah, like, okay, let me turn on display line number mode. Actually, no, I can see it in the mode line. 674 lines this file is. I mean, the text is word wrapped, so that probably accounts for more lines. However, I feel like this is very long for a license for an average person to read. However, the GPL has a lot of stipulations that are meant to be followed, so that's sort of the reason why this is the case. I think the GPL 2.0 was a lot shorter than this as well. Because of the whole set-top box TiVo thing, I believe they had to make it longer to be a lot more specific about the terms involved. So GPL is intended to guarantee your freedom to share and change all versions of a program to make sure it remains free software for all its users. There's a lot of stuff about, let's see, does the actual license, okay, terms and conditions start down here. When we speak of free software, we're referring to freedom, not price. Our GPL are designed to make sure that you have the freedom to distribute copies of free software, that you receive source or can get it if you want that you can change the software or use pieces of it in new free programs, and that you can do these things. To protect your rights, we need to prevent others from denying you these rights or asking for you to surrender those rights. Therefore, you have certain responsibilities if you distribute copies of the software or if you modify it. Responsibilities to respect the freedom of others. Let's see. So if you sell a copy or give it away for free, you must pass on to the recipients the same freedoms that you received, basically. You must make sure that they too receive or can get the source code. So that's a big thing, where if you release something as GPL, you have to make sure that they can get the source code somehow, and it has to not be burdensome, or they don't have to pay for getting access to the source code. That's one of the things that they say in the GPL somewhere. This document is too long, so obviously we're not going to read the whole thing. Terms and conditions. This license refers to version 3 of the GPL. Let's see, or later, or future. Okay, so it's not in this document, but I feel like I saw that somewhere. So GNU public license. That's not the actual name of it, obviously. All right, 3.0. I swear I saw it say somewhere that there's future versions listed as part of that, but maybe this is a specific version. Okay. Revised versions of this license. Each version is giving a distinguishing version number. If the program specifies that a certain numbered version or any later version applies to it, you have the option of following the terms and conditions either in that numbered version or of any later version published by the Free Software Foundation. Okay, I think what happens is that the license header, how to use GNU licenses for your own software, they say that you have a copyright disclaimer that mentions this. I think that's how it works. So use GPL version 3 or later. This program is free software, either version 3 of the license or any later version. And I think if you don't use that later version language, then that turns that part off. Okay. Use with the GNU Affero General Public License, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so I don't want to read this whole thing. That'd be super boring, but it's good to know that this license is meant to give you the freedom, or give your users the freedom to use, share, and modify the software under any circumstances, and also to make sure that these software can't be used in a setting where it restricts the user's freedom. So like integrating into a proprietary product that doesn't also give the user the same freedoms as the original code. Regarding the LGPL, there is an article written on the site about why you shouldn't use the LGPL for your next library, basically trying to encourage you to use GPL for libraries just so that there's a greater chance for more GPL licensed software to be created. So the reason why the GPL was made to be a viral license, meaning as soon as any GPL code is integrated, the whole project becomes GPL, was because the idea of the Free Software Foundation or the GNU project is that software that respects the user's freedoms is better than proprietary software, because you can at least inspect the code and make sure there's nothing malicious there. You can change the code to make it do whatever you want, and you should be able to update the code arbitrarily, basically, to fix issues or to make improvements. So if more software like that doesn't get created, then you don't really have a flourishing ecosystem. So the GPL license was sort of made so that it can ensure this kind of ecosystem gets created, so long as people are using the GPL license. All right, let's move on back here. All right, so the rankings. So for user, I would say 5, because the whole point of this license is to give the user the ultimate amount of freedoms and to be very specific about that, and to make sure that anybody who makes derivations of the software or distributes the software is ensuring that the user has those freedoms. For the developer, I'm giving it a 3. So the developer who wants to use GPL code in their project. And that's mainly because it's very confusing to know how to use GPL effectively if you are trying to consume GPL software. I mean, it's very easy to sort of get lost in a variety of questions about whether you can GPL something or what happens when you GPL something. So I feel like it's not so easy for the developer to use, even though if you believe in the ideals of free software, then it's pretty easy for you to make that decision. So it really just depends on what you're trying to do with it, for whether this is a problem for you or whether it makes it difficult for you. For the creator of the software, I'm going to say 5 on that. And the reason why I say 5, even though it seems like it shouldn't be a 5, is that it is something that can protect you from having your work taken by someone else and then monetized in a way that prevents you from benefiting from it. So the permissive licenses allow anybody to take the code and to do whatever they want and not release their changes. At least with the GPL license, it's going to make it a lot more unlikely that someone will try to come take your code and make a competitor out of it, because they're going to have to conform with the stipulations of the GPL license, or at least in theory. So I feel like it has more protection for you as the creator of software, and so long as you can be creative about how you use the GPL, you can definitely make a business out of GPL software, I think. However, on the understanding scale, I give this a 2, maybe even a 1, because, I mean, geez, this thing is 600 lines. It's not very easy for the average user to understand. Well, okay, let me just give it a 2. I'm not going to go that harsh on it. It's written pretty well in the early sections, but it does get into a lot of legalese, and it's very long. So it's harder for anyone really to be able to digest the whole thing, I think. So an alternative copyleft license is the Mozilla public license. And that's the 2.0 version. The 1.0 version is not compatible with the GPL. The 2.0 version has been fixed basically to make it GPL compatible and better in a lot of ways. So the difference between the MPL and the GPL is that the MPL license is a file level copyleft license, meaning that it only applies to individual source files. So if you license a source file as MPL, then anybody who takes that source file into their project, if they make changes to it, they have to make sure that those changes are also available to anyone who uses the project. So that doesn't also apply to the rest of the code, though. It's not viral in the same way. So it can be nice in certain cases where you do want your code to stay open and for the improvements to be made available to everyone, but you don't want the person consuming your code in their project to also have to do the same thing. And obviously I did not continue writing this section, but let's just go take a look at the MPL 2.0 license. I'm gonna try to move along here because we've been talking about licenses for an hour, and I think probably it's getting a little bit boring at this point. All right, so this license is also a little bit legalistic and moderately long, I would say. So they have definitions at the beginning about like who a contributor is, the covered software, blah, 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 blah. The grants, you get a worldwide royalty-free non-exclusive license to the intellectual property rights to make available, modify, perform, distribute, etc. Also patent claims. And then the grant scope. Let's see. No additional rights or licenses are implied for any code that any contributor has removed from cover software. That's interesting. For any infringements caused by third-party modifications to cover software. And under patent claims, license does not grant any rights to trademarks. Okay, that's good at least. It protects the creators from having their trademarks being used to promote the software, any derivations of the software. No contributor makes additional grants as a result of your choice to distribute the cover software under subsequent version of the license. I think that is talking about the case where you change the license in your modifications. And each contributor represents that the contributor believes its contributions are its original creations, or it has sufficient rights to grant the rights to its contributions conveyed by this license. So this is another interesting aspect of open source, where let's say you work for a company and in your work hours, you make a contribution to an open source project. Technically speaking, because you were paid to work for that company, the copyright for the code that you wrote to contribute to that project belongs to the company and not to you. So this clause is basically talking about this case where a person contributes to a project, but they do it wrong, and they basically are contributing someone else's copyrighted code to a project when it's not theirs to contribute. So I think this is basically trying to protect the original authors or copyright holders of the code from being sued from someone else contributing something that didn't belong to them, basically. It's another one of those sort of weird areas of open source that you don't really get into until you start dealing with corporate open source and large open source projects. Fair use. This license is not intended to limit any rights you have under applicable copyright doctrines of fair use, fair dealing, or other equivalents. So basically, you should have fair use of the software. Distribution of source form. Modifications you make to the software must be under the terms of this license. You must inform recipients that the source code form is governed by the terms of this license and how they can attain a copy of the license. You must not attempt to alter or restrict your recipient's rights in source code form. So I think you cannot relicense the MPL 2.0 code. Distribution of executable form must also be made. Okay, so these cover software must also be made available in source code form. You can inform the recipients where they can get it and give it to them in a timely manner at no cost other than just a distribution. You may distribute such an executable form under the terms of this license or sub-license under different terms, provided that the license for the executable does not attempt to limit the scope of the rights of the form. That's complicated. And also, you can create a larger work that uses code of different licenses. So that's part of the reason of the MPL, is so that you can take MPL code and put it into another project that uses different licenses, like the GPL, for instance. You may not remove or alter the substance of licenses, etc. I don't know. There's a lot of stuff in here. I think this may be a patent thing, or the creators can terminate your license for just about any reason, especially about patent litigation. And then the disclaimers of warranty and liability, litigation, new versions of the license, effective new versions. You may distribute the covered software under the terms of the version which you originally received, or under the terms of any subsequent version. So it gives you the opportunity to say, cover me under the later versions as well, sort of like the GPL. All right, so that's all we're going to say about that, because there's just too much to read here. Hey, bash script. Okay, so for the MPL, I'm going to say that for the user, it's not exactly a 5. I think I copied this from the previous line, so I'll say this a 4. I mean, it's clear about what the user can use it for, but it doesn't have the same freedoms for the user as the GPL, I would say. It does have a lot of it, but not exactly the same. For the developer, it's in between a 4 and a 5, because you have the ability to take someone's code that's licensed as the MPL, integrate it into your project without having to make your code also MPL. There are some stipulations you have to follow, so that's sort of why I would go between a 4 and a 5 there, but I'm going to say 5 because it's kind of nice to have this type of license. For the creator, I would say it's it's in between a 4 and a 5 also, because at least the changes someone makes to the code that you've licensed here should get shared with others. So, and it does give proper protections to the creator. So I'm going to give that one a 5 also. For understanding, it's also harder to understand. I mean, obviously, I was just trying to read it right now, and I wasn't fully understanding everything I was reading. So I'll probably leave that one as a 2 as well. Okay. Let's talk about a couple public domain licenses really quickly, because we've been talking about licenses for an hour and 10 minutes, and I would rather do some coding instead. Public domain. Basically, if you place your code in the public domain, you are relinquishing your copyright to the code and making it available to anyone for any purpose. There are a couple licenses for this. One of them is the unlicensed, which releases your work into the public domain. But the thing about public domain is that different countries or different jurisdictions have different laws about how you're able to say that something that you created is in the public domain, to relinquish it into public domain. So licenses like the unlicensed and Creative Commons 0, they both have provisions to say that in a jurisdiction that does not allow you to say it is a public domain, that it will be basically a permissive license after that. So it does give you the ability to fall back to a permissive license if you can't public domain it in a certain area. So the license itself, this is free and unencumbered software released into the public domain. Anyone is free to copy basically everything you would want to do with it. Commercial and non-commercial, and by any means. In jurisdictions that recognize copyright laws, the authors dedicate any and all copyright interests to the public domain. We make this dedication for the benefit of the public at large, the public commons basically, and to the detriment of our heirs and successors. We intend this dedication to be an overt act of relinquishment But they don't actually say anything about the permissiveness. They say in jurisdictions that recognize copyright laws, but I don't see them saying that in other jurisdictions that the permissiveness applies, except for this section. Maybe this is why. This part is the permissiveness, and then in this part, was basically the addition that says, if it's possible to make something public domain, we're also going to make it in a public domain in that jurisdiction. As Garjola states, in some countries, a public domain does not exist. So I think that's the reason why that's the case. And then we have the disclaimer section about warranty and liability, damages, etc. This is a nice and short license. It's very straightforward and to the point. Doesn't provide protection to the creators, but that's sort of the point. They're saying we're giving this software to the public domain, so we don't care, we don't care what happens with it. It's just, it belongs to everyone now. So if that's what you want, then I think that's a pretty good option. However, I will say that the Free Software Foundation recommends using the Creative Commons 0 license instead because it's more mature. I think Creative Commons in general is more mature as a licensing community or organization because they've thought a lot about this and they've got a lot of different variations of licenses that cover different contexts. So I think that they just they prefer Creative Commons licenses because they know that the people that make those licenses have thought about them very deeply. So for the user, I give this a 4 because, it gives them all the ability to do whatever they want, but it doesn't really ensure that any derivations from this work is going to ensure their freedom. So I give it a 4 instead of a 5 because, user freedom, if that's the number 5, then only GPL really kind of accomplishes that, I think. For developer, it's a 5 because obviously you can use this for whatever you want and you don't even need to include a copyright notice. So it's very easy for a developer to take this code and use it. For the creator, I say it's weird here because the goal is to make the code be free, the product be free, the program be free, and disclaim any copyright. So I'm giving it a 4 and not a 5 because it accomplishes the goal of the creator, but it also doesn't really protect them from everything that could possibly happen, like using their name or using their trademarks or whatever. Of course, you probably don't have a trademark on whatever it is that you are relinquishing into the public domain, so it's not really a concern. And for understanding, I would say this is a 4 because, I don't know, maybe I would say it's a 5. It's pretty easy to understand here. So that's a pretty nice license, I would say, if you want to release your dot files under a license that's very permissive. This would be a good choice, I think. Creative Commons 0 is also similar in that it puts it in the public domain, but in places where it can't be public domain, it makes it a permissive license. Now, Creative Commons licenses generally are not meant for software. They're meant for other creative works like music or graphics or movies, etc. And originally, I think Creative Commons 0 wasn't meant for software, but I think they made some tweaks to it that make it work for software. And the Free Software Foundation recommends this if you want to release non-software works into the public domain, but it warns you about using software that's licensed with it. And I think the reason why is because there's no patent clause, basically, that protects the creators or the users from patent trolling. So they say, if you want to release your non-software work into the public domain, we recommend you use CC0. For works of software, it is not recommended, as CC0 uses a term expressly stating it does not grant you any patent licenses. So they do the exact opposite. They basically say they don't give the user patent licenses, which means that the creator technically could sue you for the use of the code at some point in the future if they think that you're violating something, or if they just decide that they want to, I guess. So I don't know. It's kind of unsafe from that perspective, it sounds like. Because of the lack of patent grant, we encourage you to be careful about using software under this license. You should first consider whether the licensor might want to sue you for patent infringement. If a developer is refusing users patent licenses, the program is in effect a trap for users, and users should avoid the program. So something to keep in mind. I think that if this is true, I haven't read the license itself. We can try to read it now, but I found it hard to find because their website goes on a different path. Then it's kind of weird, I would say. A weird license. So, okay, you go to the CC0 page and they want to walk you through some kind of form instead of showing you the license itself. So I find that kind of strange. Where's the license text? Okay, summary and legal text. So there's a summary document, which must mean that it's fairly long itself. Okay, so basically they're saying no copyright on the work. The actual legal text. Whoa. All right, statement of purpose. Okay, it's not that long actually. Let's see, where's the patent thing in here? Okay, so no trademark or patent rights held by the affirmer are waived, abandoned, surrendered, licensed, or otherwise affected by this document, which sounds pretty strange to me if the idea is to put this in the public domain. Why would you retain your trademark or patent rights if you meant for this to be public domain? It's really risky, I think, to use something that where someone still has patent rights, because they could sue you for patent infringement. As is, disclaims responsibility. Okay, so I don't know. As far as the score of this one is concerned, I would say the understanding, I would put it at a 3. Protecting the creator, I would put it a little bit higher than, I mean, I'll put it at a 4, I think, because it is actually protecting the creator somehow because of patents and trademarks. Ashra says you need to defend your patent or trademark, otherwise you lose it. Well, that's the weird thing, though. Is like, why would you get a patent to begin with if you were gonna put it in the public domain? It seems a little strange to me, but maybe there's a reason. I don't know. For the developer, I think I would say it's probably a 5, because I don't think that you have to do anything special to conform. Yeah, I'm not sure about that one, but user, we'll leave it as a 4 or maybe a 3 because it's a little bit risky. So I don't know. That's just my opinion based on what I've read today. Literally, I only read this morning, so that's what I think about that for now. Eric was asking me about the "Don't Be a Jerk" license. Let's just quickly look at that one. Don't be a jerk. So I think this is another sort of jokey license, but it actually seems to be a little bit more meant to be a license and not just a joke. So basically, I am the software author. I might be a we, that's okay. You are the user of the software. You might be a we, that's also okay. This is free software. I will never charge you to use, license, or obtain the software. Doing so would make me a jerk. I will never take down or start charging for what is available today. It would make me a jerk. You may use this code for whatever you want, personal use, blah, 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 blah. Limiting how you can use something free would make me a jerk. I offer no warranty. If you find bugs, it would be nice if you let me know, but I don't have to, or you don't have to, so not doing so would make you a jerk if you don't let me know about bugs, okay? Speaking of bugs, I am not obligated to fix anything, nor am I obligated to add a feature for you. Feeling entitled about free software would make you a jerk. If you add a new feature, it would be nice. It would be nice if you contributed it back. You don't have to, but if you don't do it, it makes you a jerk. If you use the software, you don't have to give me credit, but it would be nice. So this is not a very binding agreement here. This is not even a legal agreement. This is more of a communal agreement, I would say, to just enforce more of a culture than a legal situation, I think. I think basically what the guy is trying to, or I'm assuming it's a guy. Maybe I shouldn't do that. The person who wrote this is trying to say that, you know, we're doing this because we want to. We're sharing this stuff because we want to, and don't try to pressure us. And also, like, it would be nice if you would contribute back to the project in some way, either by finding bugs and reporting them, or at least, you know, just not being toxic. So I don't know. I don't think this is really a legitimate license, because it's not. I don't think that this could be actually enforced. So maybe it's not meant to be enforced. It's more of a community thing. So Toki says that's actually a legally binding agreement in Denmark. Is it? That's interesting. Okay, so let me just get to my recommendations. So in my opinion, the type of license you choose really depends on the type of project you're working on. So for dot files, like just code that is not really important as far as, you know, intellectual property, more like it's just something that you're giving to people for their own learning or benefit for whatever reason. Permissive licenses are good, like MIT, or the unlicensed or CC0, but maybe I would just stick with the MIT or unlicensed. They both make it very easy for someone to take the code. With the unlicensed, at least, I don't think you need to include a copyright disclaimer, so it's kind of nice where someone can just take a snippet from your code and use it. Though I think, at least with the MIT, etc., it's not necessary to include that disclaimer for small bits of code. Like if you take a function, then you don't need to include the whole copyright notice. But if you take a whole file or maybe the whole project, you do. With unlicensed, you don't have to. So I would say maybe unlicensed wins out in that case, just because it doesn't require the person taking the code to do anything. The MPL 2.0 I would use for libraries that others might add new behavior to through independent source files. So it's nice for something that's going to be beneficial to other developers, but you don't want their whole project to become free software, I guess. But you do want the changes they make to your code to be shared with other people. LGPL probably also works pretty well for that case, but I think that in the numerous times I've looked over this in the past, it seemed like the MPL was better for various things than the LGPL for that purpose. And then GPL 3.0 for applications, especially if you intend to monetize them. So applications, I would say they're meant to be used by a user, and kind of the whole point of the GPL is for end users to have freedoms on how they use the software that's being given to them. So the GPL is the best license for ensuring the freedoms of end users. And it's also good for you if you're the person who's creating the software and you want to maybe monetize it somehow. It's good that someone else can't just take your code and run with it without having to give back to the original project, or at least release their changes to the world. It sort of keeps everybody honest, I think, if the ultimate result of taking my code is that you also have to make your code public. So, you know, people feel a little bit nervous about that. So it's good to make them nervous and not willing to actually just take your stuff and run with it. Okay, so an example. This is something I've thought a lot about over the years, and especially last year because I was doing some stuff with this. So releasing a video game under the GPL. So this is interesting because there are different things at play here that are not just code. So in a video game, you're going to have things like sound files, image files, maybe videos, game content in general. And maybe you don't want those things to also be licensed under the GPL. Well, by default, they're not, because GPL is really only intended for source. So for writing a video game, it'd be cool if you could GPL the source code so that anybody could take that source, or even the binary itself, share it with other people, make modifications, etc. But you may be thinking, well, they're just going to take everything from my project and then distribute it to other people, so I won't be able to actually make money from it, right? Well, it's not actually true. You can license all of the content for the game in a different license, whether it's like a Creative Commons license or just a proprietary license, basically, so that a person can share your binary executable, but not necessarily game content itself. The code for a lot of the early id Software games like Doom and Quake, etc., I think even Wolfenstein 3D, were all released as GPL, though you still have to own the assets of the game to play the game, basically. So you can have the code, you can change the code, you can recompile it, do whatever you want, but you can't download the actual images and game content, etc., and share that, because that is still proprietarily licensed. The other interesting thing is that with a GPL game program, you could have the game engine and everything be in there, all be GPL licensed, but the actual content could be, you could do like episodes basically of the content. So you could have, individual little chunks of content that are all sold for $3 to $5 each. And then you can put that base program, and even with the base assets for the game for like maybe the first episode, sort of like the old shareware model, on free software sites or even in repositories for free software distributions, potentially. And then people could buy additional content packs and load them into the game and play those. So the actual binary of the game itself could be free. You could share it with anybody, but then to play more content for the game, you could buy individual packs. It's sort of like DLC in a way. So if you think creatively, there are ways that you can try to make money from GPL software where the user still retains all of their freedoms to use the software the way they would like to use it and change the software and port it to different systems, but you can still make money doing something. Because the GPL doesn't have any stipulation on things that you load into the application. They don't say that you can't load things into the program that are just arbitrarily loadable, and that those things have to also be licensed GPL. So if you have game content, you can just load it up, and it's not really source code in that sense. So that's one way to look at it. For other types of applications, you would have to think of a way where functionality can be provided where the free software license sort of is just a benefit to the user but doesn't harm your ability to make income from it. So a service is one way to do that. So for instance, if you write a service application that someone is meant to use from a website or maybe some other client application on their computer, if you license it as a GPL, then you can make money as a person who hosts that service, but someone else can go host it themselves and derive benefit from it that way, which is totally fine because that's the point. But since you're the person who created it, you're sort of the authority on how it should be hosted and used. So someone might pay you to use that service instead of hosting it themselves, because there is sort of a burden to try to host something yourself. So there's various different ways to do this, and I think that you should definitely consider the possibility of using the GPL for products that you might create if you can find a way to monetize them without the GPL harming your ability to do that. Let's see. David asks, what is your opinion on OpenMW? I don't know what that is. I'm going to search for it now, though. The open source Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. It's like a rewrite of the engine as open source. I mean, if they're rewriting it from scratch and using the game data, then I think that's totally fair game, because the thing that you can't do with proprietary software often is reverse engineer it. So basically, take the code out of it and then change it and then redistribute it, because that's illegal for many proprietary programs. But if someone is able to re-implement the engine by looking at the game content files and then basically making code that works with those game content files, then I don't think there's anything wrong with that. There shouldn't be anything illegal about it. Okay, I think that's it for the license discussion today. I apologize it took an hour and a half. I didn't really expect it to take that long, but hopefully that was interesting to those of you who have thought about software licenses in the past and you've wanted to learn more about it. Definitely leave any comments you have on the video afterwards if you want to ask questions about it, or if you have any further questions about licenses, feel free to ask here. But for now, we're going to move into the next section, which is basically trying to do a little bit of live hacking today. We're going to see how much we can get through in one session. I don't know if we'll be able to do it, but we'll see. Ayush asks, do you know about new technology, My Loda Who? I don't know, but it doesn't seem... I don't want to pull up anything weird on the stream here, so let's see if I just look for... Yeah, I don't know what that is, but if you can explain more about it, that might be helpful. So, a problem I've wanted to solve for a while, for the stream actually, and for recording videos, is that this background music that you're hearing right now, I'm playing it with a program called Pragha. It's basically just a normal music player. And it's great because I have a playlist that just loops the whole time. But whenever I start the stream, I start the volume at a higher level. And then before I switch to actual video, I have to use the mouse and drag the volume slider down to the level that I want it to be at when starting the stream, because I don't want it to be very loud in the background. So I want to write a small Guile scheme program that can play my background music and also fade the audio out whenever I command it to, using basically Emacs effectively, so that I can play this background music and then control the volume in a way that's more friendly to my use cases. So the way I want to do this is to use the SDL2 library, and I'm going to use David Thompson's Guile SDL2 binding to the SDL2 library to accomplish this. So we're going to just see how far I can get with this today. Probably not very far, because we only have about 30 minutes. Ooh. I noticed that my stream quality is blinking a little bit, so hopefully it's still doing okay over there. All right, so let's go to projects, code, music player. So main.scm. I'll make the directory. And I am going to start the Geyser repo here. Sorry, the Geyser REPL. I'm going to run a Guile scheme REPL. And for some reason, it decides it wants to run it inside of another window. Let me split this window really quickly and move that over here. The Guile REPL. Okay. And then I'm going to put this back to the chat. Okay. So let's go look up the documentation. Actually, I may have it installed in info. I'm going to look up the Guile SDL2 package. Hello, SDL2. Nope, it's not here. Interesting. Nothing from Guile is here. There we go. There's some stuff. Okay, apparently it's not showing in the list yet. I wonder if I installed it correctly. That could be a problem. It should be there. SDL2. Yeah, okay, it should be there. So let me pull up the docs for that. Guile SDL2. Has anybody used the SDL2 libraries before? It's a pretty awesome project. I was doing a lot of game development with it last year using Gambit scheme, so I was having some fun with that. So here's a very simple example of starting things up. So what I'm going to do is just grab this little bit here and then paste it in and change it a little bit. So I'll take this part out because I don't want to start a renderer. I just want to do audio in the background. And I know that the audio library is called Mixer, so I'll take that. All right. I think I'm still using Lispy here. Yeah, Lispy. The chat has seemed to stop for me, so if anybody is still able to watch the stream, definitely let me know. Okay, so SDL init. I think that's enough for the beginning of this. I'll jump back to the REPL, and I also want to eval this buffer with Geyser. Control C. Thanks, Ayaku. So Control C. I see you, Eric. Thanks. All right, so I'm gonna run Geyser. Is there a Geyser eval buffer? Eval buffer. Yeah. Control C, Control B. No Geyser REPL for this buffer. Great. I wonder if it's Control Z, Control Z. Switch to REPL. Couldn't start Geyser. Searching for a program. Oh, okay. I think what I did in my config was I set this up so that I'm using Gambit as default, which I need to fix. Default implementation, well, it's set to Guile, which is very weird, but I'll take Gambit out of this list because I don't want to confuse things. Put the chat back. My computer is being extremely slow, if you didn't notice. It's the effects of running OBS. I really need a different setup for streaming, I think. Okay, so I've got that set up. Oh, this is also a thing. I need to change this to Guile because it thinks that that's a Gambit file. So what I'll do is I'll jump back to that file to main.scm. I'm gonna run scheme mode again. I think that should work it out. Control C, Control Z. Okay, good. All right, so now it at least switches to this buffer, to this REPL. I should be able to run Control C, Control B, and now it's complaining. No code for module SDL2. I hope we're not gonna have a problem with this because then we'll be hosed. Let's see. It worked on my other machine when I tried this before. I'm gonna quit out of that REPL. Control Z, Control Z, Control C, Control Z to restart the REPL. Let's try to run this one more time. No code for module SDL2. All right, so let's go back here. Echo Guile load path. Is that what? Guile load path. Oh, it's for 3.0. Maybe that's what's happening. So Guile -- version. I think I'm using. Oh no, that's Guile 2.2.7. Interesting. Something is wrong. What I may do is. Yeah, I don't know if it's gonna work. I'm thinking I need to try to make the load path get updated correctly for Guile 2.2. Yeah, I looked at Guile load path and it's pointing at the 3.0 site files, which is wrong for sure. Let me look at bash. Still 3.0, and that's the site, or sorry, the current system level one, which doesn't make any sense. I'm gonna pop back down to projects code, music player. Okay. So let's see, geyser load, add to load path, add a directory to the running schemes load path. Let me see if I can just do this really quickly. This may not work, but geeks extra profiles, code, share, Guile, 2.2. No geyser REPL for this buffer. Give me a break. Oh, that's because I don't have one created at the moment. All right, so let me grab the REPL. I think I've got a problem with my display buffer A-list setup. Yep, that would work. But I'm basically trying to do that right now. I'll do it one more time. So I'm adding the load path, .geeks extra profiles, code, share, Guile 2.2. Okay, so now let's try this one more time. Control-C, Control-B. Still no code for a module. And the problem is that I'm using eShell to set the environment for this REPL. Try this one more time. I may have to actually check it in the process. It's a real waste of time though. It's a little bit annoying. It says it's added. I don't know if I trust it. So Guile, how to check load path. I know there's a variable or maybe a function I can use to look at the load paths. Okay, so %sign load path. It's in the list. Let's actually check maybe to see if it's actually there. So Guile, sorry, geeks extra profiles, code, share, Guile 2.2. Where would it actually be in this list? Okay, is it going to be in site? Site 2.2. That's the reason why I did the wrong thing. Okay, so sorry, folks. We'll be beyond this hurdle in just a moment. So geeks extra profiles, code/code/share/Guile/site/2.2. Hopefully that'll do it. Let's check the path. Great. Now if I run this, Control-C, Control-B, I think it's doing something. And it's totally hanging Emacs at the moment, which is very interesting. Let me run it here. Use modules SDL2. Oh, come on. Okay, so it loaded that. Can I do this one more time? Oh, SDL and init. I wonder if that did something weird. Okay, it's fine. If I run this again, is it going to do anything weird? So Control-C, Control-B. Okay, seems okay at the moment. All right, let's move forward. So I think if we want to load up the mixer library, I'm going to go check out the reference manual here. Go to the sound section. And I will load the, I have that here. Maybe that's, whoops. Yeah, okay. Great. I think that Control-X, Control-E works correctly, so I don't have to change my understanding of key bindings at the moment. There is a open audio function that should work. Open audio. And I think we can pass it a frequency. I think I'm set to 9600 or 96,000 hertz on my audio device. Invalid keyword. I didn't think you wanted one. Okay, so it wants frequency. Oh, I need to init first, I think. Let me do that first. There's a mixer init that I have to call first. So let's call that here. Mixer init. And then open audio frequency 9600, 96,000, Control X, Control E. In theory, that should have opened the audio device. And now, let's see, is there a stop channel? Is there a way to list the channels? I'm kind of curious. Channel pause, playing channels count, set music volume. So I'm gonna pause the background music right now, and I'm gonna try to play a file and see if it works. So I will try, is it play music? I think play dash music. And I wonder if it's gonna be super loud. So maybe I should try to set the volume before I do this, or at least be ready to stop all the music. And these don't seem to be taking parameters, so I should just be able to call them in general. So we'll see if that works. I need to load a music file. So I'm gonna say define BG music as load music. And I think it's in my downloads folder. Let me go check the file path on this. So downloads, and then let me try this file. So download slash, oh, why did I not copy that file name? Maybe because Y does something else. We'll just do Alt W, I think, right? So let's paste it here. All right, that's cool. And I will try to load this file. Control X, Control E. It hasn't returned a, let's see, let me eval region. Guys are eval region. Okay, so that maybe it worked. Let's try, oops, I'm actually in a backtrace here. Okay. Thank you, bash script. All right, let me check BG music. It may not have gotten loaded at this point. All right, so BG music is not there. Let me try to run this again. Control X, Control E. Failed to load music, cannot find the file, downloads, etc. Why not? Yeah, I kind of assumed that these things that I did not know what they meant probably were trolls, so thanks for letting me know. The stream seems so boring now without the background music. I don't know, it sets a whole vibe that it's kind of needed, I think. Airtone renovation MP3, that should be what it's called. I don't know why it's having a problem trying to load it. Okay. Maybe I should be specific about the whole path. So home, David Will. Okay, so that worked. So this time I will try it again, and then I will look at BG music here. Okay, so when we have a music file loaded, so now I can try play music, and that takes an exclamation point. Yeah, so it's a mutation function, I guess. And we're gonna pass in BG music and see if this works. Hopefully this doesn't destroy our ears, so prepare yourself. Okay, so it worked. Great, stop dash music. Good. All right, so now we can try to control the channel volume a little bit so that we don't get deafened when this stuff starts. And set music volume seems to be the way to do that. Set dash music dash volume. And the range is from 0 to 128. I'm gonna put it to, let's say, 75 for right now. And I'll play the music again. It seems okay. Let's lower it a little bit more. So maybe, what about 30? Okay, cool, so that worked. 10, cool. Brendan K says, will the load command expand the tilde? I don't know, it doesn't seem like it does. Interesting. Did the quality of the audio change for anybody here? Because I'm getting a notification on my stream basically saying that the bitrate changed. So it's cool that that worked. I think we can pause the music. So say pause music, exclamation point. That pauses it. And I think there's a resume music that resumes it. That's great. Stop music. And we're doing all this in REPL, which is pretty cool. So now let's try. We've got our background music here. We want to play it at a certain volume. So let's try a fade and see if we can do something with that. So to fade, you would have to be updating at some interval to make the volume go down after starting at a certain level. So let's just say define start volume. I'll put that at maybe 65 just to have a safe number for that. And then maybe, yeah, we'll say end volume just for now, because we're going to change the stuff later. We're going to have commands for this, but end volume, we'll say 10 maybe. And what I need to know is whether there's a way to do something with a timer, or if I just need to have a loop that is checking at a certain frequency. Usually, we would have, okay, so the event loop maybe, make quit event, window move event. So there's like a next event or read event, poll event. Poll event is the thing. No documentation though about what that means. So that's kind of interesting. And let's see, Guile get current time. I really don't want to have a loop that's just like looping infinitely without any kind of sleep. Current time, is there a way to get it in milliseconds? Seconds, minutes, day, month, year. Unix time, maybe? No. Timestamp? No. Guile get timestamp. Eric says, why not use EMMS? I don't know if EMMS can do fades for me the way that I need them to. Because this is not really something for general music playing. This is for the specific thing where I need to have a playlist of music that's looping in the background in the stream, and I need to be able to control the volume level with fades at any given time. Let's see if there's anything for that. I don't see it so far. Guile get Unix timestamp. That's probably not worth it. So in STL, there's some timer functions. I might have to consult some of my own code here. So now we're going to take a look at, oh no, let's go sub, oops. I keep typing the wrong thing. Sub E, okay. So we're going to look at a game engine that I wrote in Gambit, but that's not really going to help us too much, but maybe it will help us with the loop for the timer. Game loop. Okay, so SDL get ticks, that's what we want. And that comes from, well, we don't know what it comes from, but I can find it in the documentation for Guile SDL2, I think. Let's pull it back here. So basics, maybe tick, SDL ticks. Get the number of milliseconds since the SDL library was initialized. Perfect. So now, Guile, let's see, while loop. I think, I'd be surprised if it actually had one, because, okay, so there is a while do. Do. What is the condition? There's the variable init and a step, and then there's a test expression. I want to be able to stop the loop. And I think I probably should be able to do this on another thread. So what if I look for Guile thread? Because I want to stop this whenever I'm finished running the application. So if you don't know what a thread is, basically it's a way for a program to have two different running lines of code at the same time. So you have two separate executions, and the operating system basically takes care of managing which one is running at any given time across the cores that you have on your machine. So STM current thread, this is C libraries. Oh, okay, they have scheme functions too. Current thread, call with new thread, great. So if I import use modules, the ICE9 threads library, so ICE9 threads, then I should be able to create a thread here, call with new thread, and then provide it with a thunk function, which is basically a lambda that takes no parameters. I can test this with, I think, display. Is that a valid function? Test. Let's try this here. Display. Display. Does it have display line? No. Test /n. Okay. So we're just going to create a new thread that just does one thing, which is write something out to the console. And it worked, it seems. So what we can do inside this thread is run a loop that is basically looping and potentially changing the volume. And can I sleep with a thread? So sleep is basically where you say, you know, don't keep running forever. Wait for some amount of time, then wake back up again. Okay, so there's a while here. While t, while f. Okay, that's even easier. That's great. So while, let's see. Define fading question mark, and I'm going to make this be true to begin with. Okay, I'll evaluate this to have it defined. And then I'll say while fading, then I'm going to write out a string. Okay. This is going to be horrible, I think, but we'll see. Lispy's doing me a lot of favors here, I think. Okay, there we go. So now, while fading is true, and then if I ever set that value to false, it should stop. So if I run this, okay, I think it's waiting until the output comes back. So now I will execute. Whoops. I wonder if it's going to let me do it. Say false. So hopefully that stopped it. But it's not actually coming back, so I wonder if it's just running on, doing whatever it wants. I will restart the REPL to kill the process. And maybe it won't let me. Yeah, let's see. Let's see if I cause a problem for myself here. Okay, cool. Control C, Control Z. So I don't know if this is working the way that I want it to. Maybe I should run it in the actual REPL itself and not try to do the evaluation because it might be causing problems. I will evaluate the buffer. Let's just see what happens when I do this. No code for module SDL2. I think it's because I restarted. That's annoying. So we'll go back and add that same profile back, code share, Guile 2.2. No, Guile site 2.2. Okay, so that should be enough. And if I try to run this one more time, Control C, Control B, ICE9 thread, no code for ICE9 threads. That's interesting. I think that the load path is really broken on this because we don't have, well, you do have that. Cool. Thanks for dropping by, Eric. Let's see, use modules, ICE9 threads. Okay, so no code for module. I wonder which path is missing because it worked last time. Maybe it is. 1 second. Let's see, code, share, Guile 2.2. Let's try that and see if it helps. Nope, doesn't work this time. Hi, Dejel asks, I have a question. I'm trying to switch to Emacs, but my space max and the scroll speed is extremely slow and laggy. Any idea how to fix that? I would look into the smooth scrolling packages for Emacs. Oh, is that right? I think you're right. Thank you very much for pointing that out. That's my fault. Thanks, KR. Whoops. I don't know why that deleted it. Okay, I think I'm in insert mode. That's really annoying. Or overwrite mode. Okay, that worked. Thank you very much, KR, for pointing that out. Obviously, I don't write Guile very often, so that's the reason why we're having some trouble here. Control C, Control B. And I've got the stopwatch throw key throw to key SDL error. Mixer failed to init library. Failed loading udev device get action. Interesting. I wonder if... let me check and see if there's a Guile process hanging around that has access to the hardware. Guile. There's one. That's 3.0. Okay, that's Geyser. Am I running 3.0 right now? Shouldn't be. And there is another. And another. Okay, there's a lot here, but it may not be from Geyser. Let's check Geyser. There's just that one. And if I kill it, hopefully this won't take anything down. Geyser X kill. Okay, so no more Geyser there. Let's try this one more time. I'm going to start up a new REPL. And then once again, I have to go add the stupid load path again. Sorry for that. I could probably just add that to the code file as a hack for the short term. Guile site 2.2. And we'll try one more time. And if it doesn't work, I might have to call it a little bit here. Control C, Control B. Yeah, I'm still getting the same error. So I wonder if the device is taken. I wonder if anything's even working right now. I see my microphone audio moving, so hopefully it actually means that things are happening in the background. All right, so I turned the background audio that I normally use back on, so it doesn't sound so empty before. Brendan, oh, you're absolutely right. I don't think that's a problem here because we're having an error before, but you are right that that this is an issue. This should be a thunk right there. But I think, you know, judging from the fact that we were able to use the SDL2 functions pretty easily to play audio and control the volume dynamically while it was playing, I think that this code will be very easy to write. So maybe I'll try again on another stream when I have more time, because this time we didn't really have much time to do it. And trying to mess with audio devices while streaming at the same time is a little bit risky, so maybe it's not the best thing to do as a coding exercise, but I thought it would be kind of interesting to show how we could use Guile scheme for that. So we're at the Q&A section now, so if anybody has any general questions about Emacs or GNU Geeks or system crafting in general, please feel free to shoot them over, and I'll try to answer them for probably another 5 or 10 minutes, depending on how things go. And while that happens, I might continue trying to poke around with this a little bit. As you season says, what are you making? I'm trying to make a simple Guile scheme program that can play audio in the background so I can control the volume while I'm streaming. All right. The risk is what makes it fun. Yeah, it makes it fun, but if the whole stream explodes and I have to turn it off, then it really causes problems. Let's see. What about... Yeah, I know, you're here watching if I'll mess it up. Failed to initialize mixer library, failed loading udev device get action. I'll try just running this one more time. Yeah, same problem. Failed to init mixer library. Undefined symbol udev device get action. That's really weird. Let's just look that up really quickly. Udev device get action, libd udev. I mean, I had that stuff installed because it worked before. Udev. I ran SDL init first, right? Ramses, yes, it is for developing games, but it's also for any other kind of multimedia application. Yeah, if I press enter and it ended the stream, that would be a very nice mic drop way of doing it. Hey, Prashant, thanks a lot. You too. All right. Oh, let me drop back to the main REPL one more time before I do this again. So running SDL init doesn't seem to cause any trouble. Loading mixer init failed to initialize mixer library. So I get a different error this time. James Leslie asks, is there any nice tools to integrate a WebDAV calendar with org agenda or another Emacs calendar package? Are you referring to CalDAV? Because there is an org CalDAV project, but I've had trouble getting it to work reliably. If you look it up, org-CalDAV. It does support quite a few things. However, whenever I've used it for my provider, which is Fastmail, somehow it doesn't sync the IDs correctly. So you sync it the first time and everything downloads fine, and then you try to sync it again and it starts complaining to you that some IDs aren't found. And I have no idea what the problem is with that. But org CalDAV is a package you could try to use for that, but it might not work perfectly. It's interesting that we're getting a different error this time. Let me just try to run open audio. See, that worked. I don't know why it didn't complain. So let's just try this really quickly. Maybe something weird happened. I'm gonna try to load some music. And then I'm gonna set let's see. Set music volume. Start volume. And then play dash music. BG music. I did this, I think. Let's try this now. That's so weird. So it was giving us errors when we ran the code, but apparently it works. It still seems too loud for the start volume. About 45. Still really loud. But maybe it's good for the beginning of the stream at least. Okay, so that works. If I run play music again. Yeah, it starts it over. That's cool. So let me just put that here. I'll try this for a couple more minutes because it actually started working. Martin Van Beek asks, how does a Lisp variant such as Guile compare to something like eLisp? Guile is definitely a more fully fledged language, and because it's Scheme and not Lisp, there are some differences in terms of how the language operates and also some of the syntax. Like for instance, you see here that we're using define instead of setQ for binding variables. So there's some definite differences between the two languages that you would have to understand before you could write one or the other, basically. But Guile is pretty cool. I think you can do a lot with it. That's kind of why I'm using it for this project, because I would like to learn it a little bit better. So I'm going to set fading to, or let's just set it to F first. And I'm going to try to run this and see what happens. My favorite Lisp dialect is definitely Scheme. Warning, possibly unbound variable fading. Well, I defined it, but maybe I didn't run this yet. That makes sense. Let's try this. Okay, so the thread finished, I think. But I can't do this easily without running it below. So maybe what I'll try to do is copy this down here and see what happens if I run it. Call with new thread, blah, 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 blah. Press enter. So now, wait, let me evaluate this first. This needs to be true. Whoops. Come on. Jeez. Having trouble typing, obviously. Okay, so fading is writing, and now, ugh. Okay, at least it seems the stream is still going. I've hosed Emacs right now pretty hilariously, I think. And the question is, am I going to actually be able to end the stream this way? So here we go. Here's the first real major issue that we've encountered in this whole thing, where now I can't actually control the computer anymore because I'm writing things incessantly. Trying to think of a way to get out of this issue without having to actually kill my Xwork session and bring down the whole stream. This is the problem with using EXWM, actually, is whenever you... Yep, there it is. Whenever you have everything running in EXWM, if you do anything in Emacs that causes Emacs to lock up, then you're in real trouble. And if you need to not have to restart your Emacs session. Darky Yard says, how do I fix a .NET framework thing when I open files? It says I have to download .NET framework. Well, I don't know. I would say start by downloading the .NET framework, but you would have to give us more information before we could tell you what you need to do. All right. Well, in this case, I think this might be a good point to stop the stream because I'm going to have to kill Emacs. And then once that happens, I think that the whole stream is going to go kaput. So I can't show the sponsor screen right now. I think I can't even click anything over there because EXWM is totally tied up at the moment. So I'm just going to have to say thank you to my sponsors without that. Yeah, I'm trying to hit Control G repeatedly and it does nothing. And if I switch to another terminal right now, another TTY, I think it's going to knock things off. It might kill the stream. So I don't want to do that yet until I'm ready for the stream to be done. All right, anyway, so I can't show the sponsor screen, but I would like to thank all of my sponsors who make this this work possible. These people have decided to sponsor the work that I'm doing, making videos about GNU Emacs, GNU Geeks, etc. And I'm very thankful to all of them for basically deciding to support the channel in this way. If you are interested in becoming a sponsor of the channel, definitely check out the links in the description below. I'm on both GitHub sponsors and Patreon. I also have a link to PayPal for one-time tips. And also, if you want another way to help the channel, definitely just share my videos with people that you know, people who might be interested in Emacs or GNU Geeks, and let them know about it so they can also come join in on the fun. So next week, I'm going to be doing another video in the Learning Emacs Lisp series that'll probably come out on Tuesday or Wednesday, depending on how much time I have. We're going to be talking about how to define a custom minor mode in Emacs, and we're going to apply that to that .crafter.el package that we've been working on so far. And then next Friday, we'll do another live stream, and hopefully I won't break the stream again like I did this time, because that was a pretty sad end to the stream, but at least I can still talk to you for now until I have to destroy the whole thing. So we'll see how it goes next week. I'll be a little bit better prepared for this type of problem. I might have to not use EXWM or just use a VM or something in the future just to make things extra safe. But anyway, thanks you all for being here today. I really appreciate you being here and chatting and being involved. I also really appreciate the people who sat through an hour and 20 minutes of me talking about software licenses. Hopefully that was interesting to you. And until next time, thanks a lot for watching. Happy hacking. You might see me trying to fix my computer right now, so we'll see. But we'll see you next time. Thanks.